P12 in qualifying, most people called it a disaster. They saw the timing sheet and assumed Lewis Hamilton was struggling, maybe even losing his edge. But inside the Ferrari garage, it wasn't disappointment filling the room, it was tension. Silent, sharp, and heavy. Not because Hamilton had underperformed, but because something didn't add up. The engineers weren't watching a failure, they were watching a move. And by the time the car rolled into Parc Fermé, some of them knew it. Hamilton hadn't collapsed. He'd set a trap. A quiet one, deliberate, precise. The kind of trap you don't notice until you're already in it. From the outside, it looked like just another off day. But behind the data screens and headset conversations, something deeper was playing out. This wasn't about tyre temps or brake fade. This was about power, control. It was about who really understands the car and who has the courage to weaponize weakness. Because that's what Hamilton did. He used the setup itself as a message. A message aimed not at fans or media, but at the very structure around him. The engineers, the decision makers, the system that keeps calling the shots. The setup didn't fail him. He let it fail on purpose, because sometimes the only way to expose sabotage is to stop fighting it. While others chased lap time, Hamilton chased something more dangerous. Truth, the kind that hides in brake traces and mid-corner instability, the kind that management would rather ignore. But when a 7-time world champion doesn't push back, doesn't demand changes, doesn't even argue about a car that won't rotate into corners, that's not defeat, that's strategy. Psychological warfare played out at 300 kilometers an hour. And the scariest part? Even his own race engineer didn't see it coming. That quiet trap didn't come out of nowhere. It started much earlier, back on Friday, when the Hungary Grand Prix weekend was just beginning. Spirits were high. On paper, Hamilton looked strong. His FP2 data showed top 3 potential. Sector times were clean, tyre degradation under control, and his throttle application was sharp in all the right places. For anyone watching the numbers, it looked like a weekend where he could fight for pole. But that's only if you were watching the numbers, not the people. Because behind the optimism, something shifted. It started subtly. A denied request here, a delayed response there. Hamilton asked for minor front suspension tweaks. Nothing extreme, just a standard adjustment for corner entry stability. The answer? Not this session. Then came restrictions on damper mapping, limited flexibility on ride height changes. Nothing that screamed sabotage, but it was just enough to shift the car's behaviour away from his driving style. And if you followed Hamilton's career, you know he notices everything. He saw it, he felt it, but he didn't say a word. He didn't argue in the post-session debrief, didn't question the modelling choices. That silence wasn't passive, it was bait. Let the team believe he's going along with it. Let them think he's accepted the car as it is. But underneath that calm exterior, a plan was forming, one that didn't involve fighting for pole, because he realised, maybe too early in the weekend, that this wasn't a fair fight. The car was being shaped to respond better in someone else's hands. The balance was off. The feedback loop felt closed. And yet, he stayed quiet. That's where the real story begins. Not in qualifying, but in the moment Hamilton chose not to resist. Not because he was defeated, but because he wanted the system to overplay its hand. When you can't change the car, you let the car change the story. And he knew, sooner or later, the data would speak louder than he ever could. By the time qualifying arrived, the trap was already set. Hamilton rolled out of the garage with a car that looked fast enough on paper, but felt unpredictable through every mid-speed corner. From the outside, it just looked like he was struggling. He missed apexes. His inputs looked twitchy. The car snapped under braking, floated at the rear, and refused to settle mid-corner. It was the kind of onboard footage people use to say, a driver's lost it. But inside the data room, the story wasn't so simple. Engineers combed through the telemetry after Q2 and couldn't make sense of it. The brake migration was inconsistent. One corner to the next, the balance kept shifting under him. When Hamilton flagged it earlier, the reply was short. It's within tolerance. That phrase, always calm, always clinical. But it's also the most dangerous phrase in motorsport. It means, we know it's not right, but we won't fix it. And Hamilton didn't push back. He let them leave it. Later, after the debrief, one engineer, speaking quietly, almost to himself, said something that cut through the room. This isn't driving, it's a demonstration. Because that's exactly what it was. Hamilton wasn't trying to extract everything from the car. He was showing what happens when the system ignores his feedback. The cornering instability wasn't a mistake. It was a message. And P12, that was the headline. He wasn't pointing fingers. He didn't need to. The car's behaviour spoke for him. Turn in sharp, then unstable. Rear end loose, front overloaded, corner exits messy. Not once did it look like a setup made for a 7-time world champion. And that's the point. The setup wasn't made for him. The data made that clear. The inconsistencies weren't errors, they were symptoms of a larger problem. One that couldn't be denied once it played out in qualifying. He wasn't exposing his own limits. He was exposing the systems. P12 wasn't a failure, it was the spotlight. As the team reviewed the aftermath of qualifying, the patterns became impossible to ignore. Behind the curtain, the setup choices had clearly split. Just 3 hours before FP3, Leclerc was granted full override control, permission to tailor the car exactly to his preference. Ride height adjusted, damping maps unlocked, aero balance fine-tuned for stability and comfort. On the other side of the garage, Hamilton's parameters were locked. No overrides, no last-minute tweaks. When he asked for changes, the response was quiet but final. Not this time. The reason? Internal sources say it was for data gathering, a phrase that sounds harmless until you realise what it actually means. He was the test case, the control variable, a live experiment on race weekend. Hamilton saw it. He understood it. And instead of pushing back, he let it play out. That was the most shocking part. Not that the car wasn't suited to him, but that he stopped resisting. The engineers expected frustration, debate, maybe even tension on the radio. But it never came. He accepted a car that no top driver would willingly race, because to him, the more broken it looked in his hands, the more obvious the contrast would become. Not just to fans or journalists, but to the very people inside the team who had stopped listening. Even on race day, during the warm-up laps, his silence was louder than any complaint. When his engineer radioed in for a final brake bias check, he didn't ask for tweaks. He just replied, "Leave it." That was the moment it all clicked. He wasn't trying to fix anything. He was trying to show something. Let the flawed setup go untouched. Let the instability be seen. Let the difference between his car and Leclerc's be undeniable. Because if the garage refused to recognise the split, he'd force them to feel it. There was no protest, no speech, no drama. Just a quiet driver in a misbehaving car, choosing not to correct it. That's not passive. That's rebellion. A calm, strategic rebellion against a structure that decided one car deserved flexibility and the other didn't. It wasn't just about performance anymore. It was about proof. And Hamilton had decided to collect it the only way left, through silence and sacrifice. When the lights went out on race day, the conditions had shifted. The track temperature had dropped just enough to change everything. And suddenly, Hamilton's car, unstable, unpredictable, borderline undrivable the day before, started to come alive. The rear end, once twitchy through corners, now held steady. Mid-corner grip returned. Throttle response sharpened. His inputs looked clean, confident, deliberate. Lap after lap, he moved forward. Not wildly aggressive, but precise, calculated. Like he knew exactly what the car would give him, and when. On the pit wall, his race engineer watched the live data feed with growing confusion. The numbers didn't match what they had expected. Lateral stability was up. Torque delivery smoothed out. Exit speeds improved. There was no trace of the chaos they saw in qualifying. And then came the radio. Hesitant. Unsure. "We're seeing unexpected balance. How did you fix that?" But Hamilton didn't answer. Just silence. No technical jargon. No setup notes. Because the truth was simple. There was nothing to fix. The car was always capable of this. He just hadn't shown it before. This wasn't a magical overnight recovery or a secret mid-race setup change. This was the same machine that had slid through turn 5 the day before. The same damper stiffness, the same ride height, the same brake migration. What had changed wasn't the hardware, it was the purpose. In qualifying, Hamilton let the flaws speak. On race day, he let the car show its full potential, not for glory, but to prove a point. A point that left the engineer stunned. The data was there, the improvement was real, and it didn't come from the garage. It came from the decision not to fight qualifying and instead use it as a stage. That realization hit hard, because if the car could perform this well all along, then Saturday wasn't a failure. It was a choice Hamilton made to reveal what the system was doing and to let everyone else connect the dots. After the race, the garage didn't feel like a place that had just pulled off a recovery drive. It felt still. The debrief room was unusually quiet, screens lit up with replayed telemetry, lines and curves telling a story that no one wanted to read out loud. Turn 5 became the center of attention. They watched the pedal trace from Saturday, jagged, unstable, with the rear slipping under braking and the front struggling to hold direction. Then they looked at the same data from Sunday, smooth, balanced, predictable, same corner, same chassis, same driver, and yet, two completely different stories. One of the engineers finally said it, almost in disbelief. The car didn't change, he did. But the truth was, Hamilton hadn't changed either. What they were looking at wasn't a driver finding sudden speed. It was a driver revealing the difference between what he was given and what he allowed them to see. Saturday was never about being slow. It was about showing the cost of being ignored. This wasn't rebellion. It was performance art. Every missed apex, every lift off the throttle, every instability, they weren't mistakes. They were messages. That's when the realization started to spread. Hamilton didn't need to walk in and accuse anyone. He didn't need to argue or raise his voice. The data had already done it for him. And his engineer, the one who had been watching all weekend, wasn't shocked at how well Hamilton drove on Sunday. He was shocked at how precisely he had controlled the narrative, at how perfectly he had let the system trap itself. The race wasn't just about gaining positions. It was about forcing the garage to look in the mirror. This was more than just a fight over setup. It was a battle over trust, over whose feedback shapes the car and whose doesn't, over who gets listened to and who gets logged and labelled with intolerance. And in that quiet room, the numbers didn't lie. They exposed everything. When the race ended, there was no fist pump, no dramatic radio shout, no celebration. Hamilton stepped out of the car calmly, took off his gloves, and gave a small nod, more to himself than anyone else. Around him, the usual post-race noise faded into background static. But inside the garage, one man stayed frozen. His race engineer sat staring at the telemetry screen, still replaying the numbers, still trying to make sense of it. The data didn't lie, it never does, and what it showed wasn't a recovery, it was a reveal. The same car that crumbled under pressure in qualifying had just delivered clean, consistent pace in the race. And not because of a miracle fix, because Hamilton had let it happen exactly this way. The engineer kept shaking his head, not out of disappointment, but because he finally understood. This wasn't about a bad lap or a risky setup. This was a message, delivered through throttle traces and brake curves, written not in words, but in precision and patience. Hamilton didn't fight the setup. He let it misfire. He let the instability scream louder than his voice ever could. Because sometimes, fighting a system head-on only makes it dig deeper. So he chose another path. He stepped aside, let it show itself, and let everyone around him realize the truth on their own. P12 wasn't a mistake. It was a fuse. A small moment set off to light up something bigger, something that couldn't be ignored anymore. The real win wasn't on the timing screen. It was in the silence that followed, the kind of silence that comes when the truth finally breaks through. Not shouted, not forced, just revealed.